Welcome back to the Brain Food Blog. I'm Dr. Drew Ramsey. In these trying times, spirituality is an issue that's increasingly coming up in our clinical practices as patients wonder what to make of all the news today. So I wanted to take a little time and speak with one of our experts, a psychiatrist and author of a new book, Fulfilled, Dr. Anna Yusum. And thank you so much for coming on. And I wanted to hear about your book, but as a clinician, before we talk about your book, I want to hear, how did you begin to integrate spirituality into your clinical work?
Spirituality entered my clinical work when it entered my own life, because I found a spiritual path to be quite transformative. And I had my own dark night of the soul that led me to soul searching. And that search took me to ashrams in India, learning meditation in Thailand, and working with shaman in South Africa and South America. Eventually studying Kabbalah here in New York City.
You were that residency. I had a spiritual
I was
crisis.
that resident.
I had a spiritual crisis in residency, but it sounds like you actually really did something with yours.
I certainly tried, exactly. And so that ended up defining my life in such a powerful way. As I integrated into my own life, I started working with patients to the degree that they were open to it in my practice.
What would you recommend to those of us who aren't doing a lot of this work clinically? What kind of questions should we ask to get started?
I'll give you what my definition of spirituality is: connection to something greater than oneself. For some people, that's God. For other people, it's the universe. For other people, it's even transcendent global values like hope and love. And so what I would ask is, in terms of patients, do you consider yourself a spiritual person? In what way? What are practices that you do? What are rituals that you may follow? How were you raised, and how has that changed over time in what you do now?
It sounds like there's this real distinction that sometimes we don't make between a religious practice and a spiritual practice.
Exactly. For some people, it's one and the same, and religion can be the gateway to a very spiritual practice. At the end of the day, spirituality is what brings people more love and unity. And if religion does that, beautiful. But religion also, with extremism, can bring disharmony too at times.
Love and unity definitely would be a good end treatment goal for most of our patients.
Absolutely.
What types of things do you see happen in your clinical practice as people begin to think more about their spiritual lives?
In my practice, it's really, I feel, important to meet people where they're at. Some people are going to be spiritual and very open to it, and others won't. And for those people, it could develop over time. As people start to connect to that part of themselves, they rely less on external ways of starting to fill their inner voids. They start to look for fulfillment more internally, within their own hearts, really, through meditation practices, as opposed to through external accoutrements of success, through achievement, through money, power, status, the so-called psychological addictions. It's not to say that those things are bad or negative in any way, not at all. But they become more addictive when the more of them that you have, the emptier you feel. So that's those times that we start to fill our inner voids that we have, spiritual crises or existential crises.
We have a huge issue around physician burnout. I think for those of us in mental health, this presents a bit of a conundrum because we want to help our colleagues and we aren't exactly sure what to do. Spirituality feels like it plays a big role in physicians feeling satisfied. I'm wondering what you recommend when people want to deepen their own spiritual practice. What are some sort of quick first steps for people to think about?
A first step that I would recommend is people starting to reconnect with themselves. Because often what leads to burnout is, on some level, we're disconnected from ourselves and what we really need. We find ourselves having to people please. I would recommend saying to oneself and starting to ask the question, what do I most deeply want? It's such a simple question, but how many of us really ask that question, and how many of us forget because everybody else wants something from us? I treat so many physicians who are so good at taking care of everybody else, but not as good at taking care of themselves. So just a very simple question, ask yourself throughout the day, sometimes multiple times a day, what do I most deeply want?
Feels like that part of spirituality in medicine has been lost, but we almost can't ask that anymore. Well, this has been wonderful.
Thank you,
Everyone,
Drew.
please check out Dr. Yusum's book, Fulfilled. It's in bookstores all over. And thank you so much for tuning again to another episode of The Brain Food, where we've discussed spirituality and some of the ways to think about that as a mental health professional and physician, but also ways for you to think about that personally. Thanks.